All right, here we are. It's day 2, and we're going to continue to lay the foundations of a language around politics. And so last time we said, yes, there's a text in this class. This time we're going to play with Plato and, the ancient Greek tradition. So to situate ourselves, Plato is a philosopher. He wrote a book called The Republic. It's also called Politics, okay? He had a student named Aristotle who also wrote a book called Politics. And by the time we get to the Enlightenment, 1651, when Hobbes writes Leviathan, which we'll take a close look at, the Aristotelian Platonic logic around politics is being critiqued. So we need to know what that kind of politics is, because the framers use the language of ancient Greek culture, right, the Greek tradition, but also the language of the Enlightenment. So we have this kind of mixed dialogue between Platonic, Aristotelian, and Enlightenment reason, okay? So playing with Plato for a minute. So Plato, his teacher is Socrates. Remember Socratic dialogues, this idea that questioning down all the way to kind of the root system of whatever you're discussing could be anything, art, love, politics. Questioning is kind of the main principle, and dialogue. So that's Socrates' method. In Plato's writings, he uses his teacher Socrates as a character. Okay, so Socrates probably didn't write anything down, but Socrates is sort of embodied in Plato's writings. So the 5 Dialogues, which is a famous little tract by Plato, Socrates is the main character, okay? He's the guy who eventually gets sentenced to death by critiquing, or because he critiqued democracy. He had death by direct democracy. But Plato, kind of like the writers of the Gospels who have Jesus as their teacher, Plato is doing a kind of life of Socrates in his writings, all right? And so if you end up reading some of the Republic and you're like, what is going on? This looks like a play. Yeah, it's a dialogue where Plato injects his ideas through the character of Socrates. We tracking? Okay? And this is all 400 years before the time of Jesus. So this ancient Greek tradition sort of is the backdrop of, if you were to read the New Testament, what's going on with some of Paul's language. Okay, he uses some of the same language as Plato to explain what's going on in Jesus, okay, which we'll look at over here in a minute. So Plato has this ideal in mind. He calls it, in Greek, it's just the word telos. We get the word teleological in theology. We get the word telescope. It's the idea that something out there has an end, like, a telescope's looking at a particular end or a particular goal, a planet in this case, and everything's sort of oriented by that end. It's focused on that end. So for example, if your goal, your end, your telos is to be a good person, well, your life would have to, be ordered in such a way that it conforms to this ideal, this idea of, being a good person, okay? So this is teleological. Plato assumes that there's a telos that people are aiming at when it comes to politics, when it comes to how we organize ourselves as humans, which is what the word, it's back here, P-O-L-I-T, and then a little Greek ending, politics, essentially. And then this word, I've elongated it, but diakosune, dike or dike, simply means righteous, or often it's translated just or justice. So when Plato is writing his famous treatise on politics, we call it Plato's Republic, he says that politics, and here's the subtitle, is about just, and I'll put a slide at the bottom of this, but it's about just And then he uses the word, some people think he invented it, persona. Politics of the just persona. Essentially, he begins with the premise that a politics, a way of organizing people, actually involves people, all right? And just people or just personas. So how do you create a society that ultimately at the end, its telos is, Plato says, justice? Well, you need people acting together justly to create that end, that ideal, okay? So the way Plato describes this is there's lots of things that people can do. People can, what can people do? And if we were in class, I'd, say, who can bake? And we'd say, we have a baker, okay? And that baker, oh man, you make good sourdough bread. It's got, yeast that's been passed down through generations. You are a baker. Maybe even your last name is Baker, okay? This is what you do. And in Greek tradition, you would have, essentially some apprentices, some people that would learn under you how to bake. It might be your children, the bakers, and you essentially would, throughout generations, you would perfect the art of baking, right? It's an artistry. Or let's say you're not much of a baker, but you're, well, here, I'll inject myself here. My last name's Rinker. It's kind of a Jewish-Dutch surname that is related to like a corner store. So maybe my family, ran corner stores or something in the past. The Winklers or the Rinkers. Okay, I have a spin on it. It's a Minnesota spin. What if I was, the Rinker, the Zamboni driver? I take care of the rinks in this ideal society, and I have perfected the art. I have a perfect little swivel. I've developed some technologies even. My craft is perfect. I am the village Zamboni driver. And if you're going to live in Minnesota, you need one of these, right? So that we got a rinker, or just a rink, okay? A baker, and of course, the rinker and the baker, they're going to teach people how to do their craft. They're going to essentially replace themselves eventually, but each succeeding generation is going to do it better, more closely to the ideal, which is never really manifest anywhere, but we can hope, right? So what else would we include in an ideal society besides people who make bread? And I guess I could be kind of like maintenance crew, the baker needs someone to mill the bread, right? So maybe we need some millers. The millers, love the millers. They're great. Millers, so someone to mill. And there's a real art to this, okay? Just ask the millers. What else? There is the smiths. I don't know if there's any smiths around here, but the smiths would be helpful because they're like blacksmith. They work with metals and they do some artisan stuff. They can do the construction. So we got the smiths. I mean, what else do we need? We got people building things. We can eat stuff. Only took 2 families. We can recreate. I don't know. What else do we need? At this point, someone would say something like, we need, a government, because we're in government class. But hold on. This is government, according to Plato, okay? Plato might say, a ruler who's basically a philosopher would be kind of nice to keep things running smoothly, or at least it wouldn't, cost as much, because, philosophers, they don't need to make much money. He might say you need, in order for a society to be just, you might need erasing takes a long time. While I was recording this, my whiteboard broke, and here's a little extra bit. The story about how the Olympics started with the marathon race, and this is a messenger, right? And messengers were people that delivered messages between towns, and it's a really important message that he delivers. And the distance is about 26.2. I think there's some background to this. It's probably 25 miles. But he delivers the message, then he dies. And in ancient Greek culture, it was not, oh man, we should not make people run this distance. But this is the perfect distance. This is the telos distance for running. If you can run this distance at a certain speed and not die, you have achieved perfection. You have reached telos, perfection, the goal in running. And so then, we have a sporting event that grows out of this tradition of watching people run on the brink of death. Okay. So just to note here, in Greek politics, there's also elements of competition which we inherit. It's important to, make things better or identify the exemplar and then use that as the basis. Let's just say there's some kind of council, okay? But we need a last name for them. How about the rulers? And actually, they're educational specialists, hence the rulers. They provide rulers for the society. But they also say, hey, everyone, this is what we're supposed to do. Here's the structure. We're not sure if they're working with the meter system, or the imperial system. We just don't know. But Plato's idea or ideal, the idea of the ideal, looks a little bit like this, and every class would be different, but it's all aimed at justice. This just society made up of persons. And so two things are going on here. You have the society as a whole, right? The politic. But you also have all of these bodies that make up the politics. And so there is a corporate, right? A social, and then an individual element. And good politics have to account for individuals and the larger structure they're a part of, right? How do they participate? How do they create the structures? And in ancient Greek society, you had this idea with each different realm, the most essential stuff, art being one of them, music being one of them. You had these professionals or these specialists that were working their craft, their techne or technique, into the ideal version of whatever they were doing. This, Plato says, is what a just politic looks like. A bunch of different parts working together towards a common, just society. He called this the common good. All right, now around the same time that Plato's writing down these ideas, there's another body of literature, sacred literature, coming together. We call it the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, or the Hebrew Bible. And there is a politically oriented book in the Torah, one of the first 5 books of the Bible, the 5th book of the Bible. Deuteronomy is the second law, and it's really focused on the polity of the people. And in this book, Moses, by the middle chapter, so 16, 17, and 18, is talking about the priests, the judges, and eventually the king, who's not supposed to be a warmonger, who's not supposed to collect lots of wealth or have lots of wives, the 3 big W's they're not supposed to do. And in that chapter, the beginning of that series, 16, he says, tzedek, tzedek terdof, which is this way of saying justice, justice you'll pursue. It's a teleological idea that you're supposed to seek out, pursue justice. That's how society will be whole, will be good. We'll have, the Hebrew term is shalom. All right, a little side note there. It's good and it's common to all. All right, we've played with Plato, maybe a little too long, but you get the idea.